Well, let's get some analysis on this crisis now with Matthew Bryza, the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. He joins us now from Istanbul. Hi there, Matthew. Thanks so much for joining us on the program. Can I start by asking you about the potential energy implications that this crisis could spark? We know that Russia supplies about a third to 40% of Europe's natural gas supplies. And now we've got the Biden administration now coming up with some sort of a workaround to those Russian supplies in the event that perhaps Moscow might turn off the taps in retaliation to any sanctions that might be opposed against them. Tell us, how effective might a US-led plan be, given the fact that Russia supplies so much energy to the continent?
Yeah, and my statistics are about between 1/4 and 1/3 of the gas consumed in Europe comes from Russia. That's true. And that's a vulnerability for Europe if Russia were to shut off that gas flow. But Russia that definitely does not want to do that. Just like Putin does not want to go through a very costly and dangerous full-scale invasion of Ukraine because it will result in a lot of deaths on both sides. So does Russia not want to cut off gas flows to Europe because Europe is by far the largest customer of Gazprom. And daily, back in 2014 when Russia first invaded, Russia was earning $100 million per day in terms of its exports to Europe, and that is a much higher figure now with gas prices having increased. So, if Russia were to cut off gas flows to Europe, that would be the equivalent of a declaration of war, and we would see all sorts of reactions in Europe. But what the U.S. is trying to do now could really help Europe get through the winter. Right now, the United States is providing, or U.S. companies, liquid natural gas. 95 tankers of liquid natural gas were flowing from the United States to Europe in December, and that's about 15% more than last year. That, if the U.S. can really organize additional supplies, can get Europe through this winter. Of course, Europe will have to pay for that, and LNG supplies are expensive now, given how high natural gas prices have soared. So Europe will have to maybe come up with a fund. The European Central Bank could issue bonds guaranteed by member states. A fund of, let's say, 20 billion euros should suffice to get them through the winter, and that would act as a deterrent to Russia, to cutting off gas supplies. But then next year is a new year. This sort of emergency supply of LNG can't provide Europe with a long-term solution if Russia decides essentially to go to war with Europe using natural gas.
It's been interesting to observe how Germany has been responding to this escalating crisis. Instead of supplying arms, soldiers to this effort to deter Russia, it's supplying essentially medical supplies to this effort. Some allies are quietly questioning how committed Berlin is to, I guess, opposing this Russian aggression. Germany, of course, relies heavily on Russian imports of natural gas as well. How is Germany reacting to this? What's your take on the situation?
I totally agree with the premise of your question. Germany has been for well, a century and longer, 200 years, had a special relationship with Russia, going back to the late 18th century when it was Berlin and then St. Petersburg and Vienna that carved up Poland and eliminated it from the European map for 123 years. And so, we saw during World War II a special relationship between Germany and Russia, and that's left, I think, in the German psyche, a fear of another catastrophic conflict with Russia. So that's one factor. Second factor is the deep dependence of German business on Russia, not only for imports of energy, but for investments as well. So the German business community doesn't want conflict with Russia. And then there's what you already mentioned, which is the natural gas imports from Russia into Germany. So I think what Russia knows and President Putin knows is that he has a chance to split Germany off from the rest of the NATO alliance because Germany is so hesitant to get involved in conflict with Russia. And therefore, yes, Germany has basically refused to provide any sort of weaponry to Ukraine. Now, to be fair to Germany, Germany claims or argues that its policy universally is not to export arms because of its obviously tragic history during World War II and taking the blame for Nazism.
Okay, Matthew Bryza, always really good to get your analysis. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.